The following tale is plucked from the pages of a nameless tome, a manuscript whispered of in hushed tones by those who dare tread too close to the edge of sanity. It is said that merely speaking of the events you are about to hear invites danger beyond reckoning. For these are the deeds and misdeeds of souls whose fates were sealed the moment they crossed into shadowed realms where darkness reigns eternal. Be warned, listener, do not repeat what you hear to others. Do not commit these words to memory, nor linger on the images conjured within your mind. To do so is to risk incurring the wrath of, well, perhaps it is best if I leave the name unspoken. Even now, it claws at the corners of my mind. Know this, should you choose to continue, you do so at your own peril. And remember, you have been warned. This is a tale called The Sinister Getaway. Richard sat alone in the dim living room, his gaze fixed on the screen of Teresa's phone. The cold light from the device reflected off his face, casting shadows that seemed to deepen the longer he stared. His hands trembled, but not from fear or anger, they shook with the numbness of realization, the unbearable weight of betrayal. The videos had been hidden away, tucked into a folder labeled innocuously as work events. Curious about what his wife had been up to, given her frequent absences and unexplained outings, he had accessed her phone, thinking perhaps there was a simple, mundane explanation for the distance that had grown between them. But there was no such explanation. The first video he watched showed Teresa, his beloved Teresa, sitting on the lap of another man. Richard recognized him immediately, Thomas Gray, the manager of the local bank. They were at a party, a raucous gathering filled with laughter, music, and far too much alcohol. Teresa's voice, slurred and giggling, rang out over the sound of clinking glasses. She leaned in close to Thomas, her lips brushing his ear, and whispered something that made his hand slide down to her waist. Richard felt his heart lurch, his breath hitching as he watched the scene unfold. He almost turned off the video, almost spared himself the agony of what came next, but some grim, masochistic need to know the full truth held him there, eyes wide and unblinking. The camera jostled and shifted, showing the faces of Teresa's friends, a tight-knit circle of women who had never liked him. They were there, every single one of them, hooting and cheering as Thomas lifted Teresa onto the table, his hands roaming over her body. And then, the male strippers appeared. Richard's stomach churned as he realized what kind of party this was. In the video, one of the women, Sandra, if he recalled correctly, turned the camera on herself and grinned drunkenly. "Look at Teresa go," she shouted. "Her husband's probably slaving away at work, and here she is, having the time of her life. Guess he really is just a broke fool after all, huh?" Richard's blood ran cold. He had been working overtime that weekend, trying to save up for a romantic getaway for Teresa's birthday. He had thought she would appreciate it, that maybe some time away together would reignite whatever spark they had lost. But Teresa hadn't needed him. She had only needed his absence. The next video was worse. Another party, another night he hadn't known about. Teresa was in Thomas's arms again, but this time there were no friends around. It was just the two of them, and from the way they moved, the way their bodies pressed together, it was clear they weren't just dancing. Richard felt his vision blur. He didn't know how long he sat there, staring blankly at the screen, his mind racing through a whirlwind of emotions, disbelief, anger, despair. But one thought settled in his mind, dark and insidious, wrapping around his heart like a vice. They all knew. Every one of Teresa's so-called friends had known about her affair. They had encouraged it, laughed about it behind his back. They had belittled him, called him names, mocked his efforts to provide a good life for his wife. And Teresa, she had gone along with it all, without a hint of remorse or guilt. Richard felt something break inside him then, a fragile thread that had tethered him to the man he used to be. He took a deep breath, the sound rattling in the silence of the empty apartment, and set the phone down gently on the coffee table. The hurt was still there, a raw wound that ached with every beat of his heart. But now, something else lurked beneath the surface. Something dark. Something vengeful. He wouldn't confront her. No, that would be too easy. Teresa and her friends had treated him like a fool, a hapless pawn to be toyed with and discarded at their leisure. But they had underestimated him. A plan began to take shape in his mind, twisted and unnatural, but one that brought a grim smile to his lips. They would pay. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 days after Richard's discovery. The couple sat at the small dining table, the silence between them thick and uncomfortable. Richard glanced up from his dinner, his expression carefully neutral as he studied his wife's face. Teresa was scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed in irritation. "I heard from work today," he said casually, drawing her attention. "They want me to go to a managers' conference this weekend. It's mandatory, so I'll be out of town for a few days." Teresa didn't even bother to hide her relief. "Thank God. I can't imagine having to sit through one of those boring things. You know I hate business trips." Richard smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know. I thought you might want to take the opportunity to do something fun. Maybe go out with your friends, relax, or even take a trip yourself. You deserve it." She glanced at him, suspicion flashing in her eyes. "What, you want me to just take off while you're working? Why not?" He kept his tone light, nonchalant. "You've been wanting to go somewhere nice for a while now. Remember that resort I mentioned a few months back? The one with the private beach and all the amenities?" Teresa's eyes narrowed. "Why are you bringing this up now?" Richard shrugged, reaching for his glass of water. "I just thought, it's a good opportunity. You can enjoy yourself without worrying about work or me hovering around. I can make some arrangements if you want." She hesitated, the gears in her mind visibly turning. Richard watched, his smile never wavering as he waited for her to take the bait. It wasn't the first time he had subtly planted the idea of a trip, weaving it into their conversations over the past few weeks. He had let it simmer, let her believe it was her own desire. "Actually," she said slowly, her tone thoughtful, "I think I might do that. I'll talk to the girls and see if they're up for a little getaway. A weekend at a resort sounds perfect." Richard nodded, his heart thudding with anticipation. "Great. I'll take care of the details. Consider it a gift." Teresa's lips curled into a smirk, and she reached over to pat his hand condescendingly. "At least you're good for something, huh?" He laughed softly, the sound hollow in his own ears. "Yeah. I guess I am." With meticulous care, Richard set the plan in motion. He contacted the resort, ensuring that every detail was in place, the luxurious suite, the welcome package, and, most importantly, the special entertainment for their stay. Teresa was none the wiser. She had believed it was her idea, had bragged to her friends about how she had convinced Richard to pay for their girls' trip, oblivious to the fact that every step had been orchestrated by the very man she thought she was deceiving. Richard's smile widened as he imagined the surprise awaiting them. The creature, no, the thing, he had contacted would take care of the rest. It had promised him results, a permanent solution to his problem, in exchange for a simple offering, the life of a betrayer. And Richard was more than happy to oblige. The day of departure arrived. Richard kissed Teresa goodbye at the doorstep, his smile warm and sincere. "Enjoy yourself," he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers. She rolled her eyes, shooing him away. Yeah, don't burn the house down while I'm gone." He watched as she climbed into the car with her friends, the women chattering excitedly about the upcoming trip. As they drove off, Richard's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "Enjoy yourself, Teresa," he whispered softly. "It'll be the last trip you ever take." Teresa and her friends arrived at the resort with a flurry of excitement and laughter. The place was even more extravagant than they had imagined, with sweeping views of the ocean, luxurious suites, and a staff that catered to their every whim. Teresa felt a rush of satisfaction as she stepped into the opulent lobby, her friends trailing behind her, their eyes wide with awe. "This is it, girls," Teresa announced, her voice brimming with triumph. "A weekend of fun, sun, and absolutely no drama. Let's live it up." They cheered in agreement, already making plans for spa treatments, cocktails by the pool, and a night out at the resort's exclusive club. Teresa's heart swelled with pride. Richard was a fool, but at least he had been good for one thing, funding this little slice of paradise. Once they had checked in, they made their way to the private suite that Richard had arranged. Teresa gasped as she stepped inside. The space was massive, filled with plush furnishings, tasteful decor, and a sprawling balcony that offered a breathtaking view of the beach below. "Oh my God, Teresa, this is incredible," one of her friends, Sandra, exclaimed, spinning around in delight. "How did you get Richard to agree to this?" Teresa smirked, tossing her bag onto the nearest bed. "Oh, you know. I have my ways." The others laughed, their voices bubbling with mirth as they settled into the suite, chattering excitedly about their plans for the weekend. Teresa felt a surge of smug satisfaction as she poured herself a glass of champagne from the complimentary bottle that had been chilling on ice. "Here's to us," she declared, raising her glass. "And to a weekend we'll never forget." They clinked glasses, unaware of the dark promise hidden in those words. That evening, after a luxurious dinner and more drinks than Teresa could count, the women decided to head to the resort's private club. The atmosphere inside was electric, the music pounding and the lights flashing in time with the pulse of the room. The women danced and laughed, losing themselves in the heady rush of the night. Then, as the hour grew late, an announcement echoed through the club. "Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. Please welcome, the most tantalizing entertainment of the night." Teresa's heart skipped a beat as the spotlight shifted, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man stepping onto the stage. His face was shadowed, but as he moved closer, the light caught on his chiseled features and intense, smoldering eyes. The man was stunning, almost too perfect, with a smile that seemed to promise every forbidden pleasure imaginable. The women around her squealed with delight, their excitement reaching a fever pitch. Teresa couldn't tear her gaze away as the man began to dance, his movements sinuous and mesmerizing. He was magnetic, exuding a raw, primal energy that seemed to fill the room, drawing every eye to him. He moved through the crowd with a predatory grace, his gaze sweeping over each woman in turn. When his eyes landed on Teresa, she felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something strange about the way he looked at her. Something that made her skin prickle and her breath catch in her throat. But before she could dwell on it, the man smiled, a smile that sent a thrill of anticipation and fear coursing through her veins. He stepped off the stage and made his way toward their table. "Good evening, ladies," he purred, his voice like velvet. "Mind if I join you?" The women around Teresa giggled, their eyes wide with desire and curiosity. Teresa found herself nodding, her pulse racing as the man slid into the seat beside her. "What's your name?" she asked breathlessly, her heart pounding in her ears. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her skin. "My name is whatever you want it to be," he murmured, his voice a low, seductive drawl. Teresa's cheeks flushed, her mind spinning as the man's gaze seemed to pierce straight through her. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, the lights flickered, and then, abruptly, went out. A murmur of confusion rippled through the club, the air thick with unease. Teresa glanced around, her eyes struggling to adjust to the sudden darkness. But then the lights flashed back on, bathing the room in a harsh, blinding glow. And that's when she saw it. The man's face, it had changed. His eyes, once a rich, warm brown, were now a vivid, unnatural crimson. His skin seemed to shimmer and ripple, like something was moving beneath the surface. Teresa's breath hitched as she realized that his smile, once charming and alluring, was now twisted into something grotesque, a cruel parody of human expression. What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The man, no, the creature, leaned closer, his smile widening to reveal rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. "Your worst nightmare, darling," he hissed, his voice a guttural snarl. The room exploded into chaos. Women screamed and scrambled back as the creature straightened, its form shifting and contorting. What had once been a man was now something monstrous, tall and gaunt, its limbs too long, its fingers ending in razor-sharp claws. It moved with impossible speed, a blur of motion as it lunged at Sandra, its claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. Blood sprayed across the floor as Sandra crumpled to the ground, a gurgling scream tearing from her throat. Teresa's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled backward, her mind reeling with shock and horror. No, this can't be real. But it was real. The creature, Richard's gift, had come to collect. One by one, the creature hunted down Teresa's friends, its laughter echoing through the club as it tore them apart with ruthless efficiency. The women's screams filled the air, mingling with the sickening sound of ripping flesh and breaking bones. Teresa watched in helpless terror as each of her friends fell, their bodies mangled and broken, their blood pooling on the floor. Her mind screamed at her to run, to escape this nightmare, but her legs refused to move. She was frozen, trapped in place by the sheer, overwhelming horror of what she was witnessing. "Please," she whimpered, her voice a desperate plea. "Please, don't kill me." The creature turned its gaze on her, its crimson eyes burning with a malevolent light. It moved closer, its claws clicking softly against the floor as it approached. Teresa's breath came in shallow, panicked gasps, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Why?" she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this?" The creature's smile widened, and it leaned in, its foul breath washing over her. "Because, Teresa, you betrayed him. You betrayed the one man who loved you. And now, you'll pay the price." Her heart stuttered in her chest, her mind reeling. What are you talking about?" "Richard," the creature purred, savoring the word. "He knew, Teresa. He knew everything. The lies, the affair, he knew. And he sent me here, to deliver his message." "No," Teresa whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, he wouldn't do this. He wanted me to enjoy myself." The creature laughed, a deep, guttural sound that rattled her bones. "Oh, but he did. Every detail, every arrangement, was part of his plan." Teresa's mind spun, her thoughts a tangled mess of disbelief and confusion. "No, he wouldn't." "Wouldn't he?" The creature's smile turned mocking, its eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "He did this, Teresa. He gave you to me. And now, I'll make sure you never forget it." Terror seized her, a primal, consuming fear that made her want to scream, to claw at her own skin just to escape the truth of it. "Please, don't." The creature tilted its head, as if considering her plea. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one clawed hand and traced a line down her cheek, the sharp tip drawing a thin trickle of blood. "I won't kill you, Teresa," it murmured, its voice a chilling whisper. "Not yet. You're going to suffer first. You're going to feel every bit of pain, every ounce of regret. And when I'm done with you, you'll beg me for death." Her world spun, the edges of her vision darkening as the creature's words sank in. "No, please, don't." The creature's laughter echoed through the room, a sound that would haunt Teresa's nightmares for the rest of her short, miserable life. And then the darkness closed in, swallowing her whole. Back at home, Richard sat alone in the quiet, empty apartment. The phone on the table buzzed softly, the screen lighting up with a message, "It is done." Richard stared at the words for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. He had done it. The plan had worked. But instead of satisfaction or relief, a strange hollowness settled in his chest, a cold, empty space where his heart used to be. Teresa was gone. She and her cruel, vindictive friends, those women who had laughed at his kindness, belittled his efforts, and poisoned his wife's mind, were all gone. Richard had seen to that. He'd made a deal with something beyond human understanding. He'd given up his own sense of decency, his own soul, in exchange for a single promise, their suffering. And the creature had delivered. Yet, as Richard sat there, staring blankly at the faint reflections of the city lights glimmering through the window, he couldn't help but wonder, had it been worth it? Had the act of revenge truly quenched the seething rage that had burned within him since the day he discovered Teresa's betrayal? No. If anything, the anger was still there, festering just beneath the surface like a wound that refused to heal. His phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message. Would you like to see? Richard's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the phone. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the screen. Then, with a deep breath, he tapped the message. The phone screen flickered, and a video began to play. The image was grainy, shrouded in darkness, but Richard could make out the shapes, the twisted, contorted figures of Teresa's friends, their faces frozen in expressions of abject terror. Blood stained their bodies, their eyes wide and unblinking. The camera panned slowly, capturing every detail, every gruesome wound, every last broken bone. And then, the image shifted. Teresa was there, her body suspended in the air, held up by dark tendrils that wrapped around her limbs like chains. Her head lolled to the side, her hair matted with blood and sweat. But she was alive. Barely. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths, her lips moving soundlessly as if begging for mercy that would never come. The camera zoomed in on her face, and for a moment, her eyes fluttered open. She stared directly into the lens, her gaze empty, hollow. "Richard," she whispered, the sound barely audible through the speakers. He swallowed hard, his throat tightening. There was no anger in her eyes now, no cruelty or malice, only a terrible, broken despair. It should have satisfied him. He should have felt some semblance of triumph. But instead, a strange numbness washed over him. "Do you want her to die, Richard?" a voice whispered through the phone. It wasn't the creature's voice, but something else, something deeper, more insidious. It resonated with a dark power, a promise of finality. He stared at the screen, at Teresa's ruined form, at the faint, flickering spark of life that still lingered within her. He could end it now. With a single word, he could erase her completely, sever the last thread that bound her to this world. But as he opened his mouth to speak, the words caught in his throat. "No," he whispered, his voice strained. "No, not yet." The screen went black, and the phone fell silent. Richard sat there, staring down at the darkened screen, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. He had wanted her to suffer, to feel every ounce of pain she had caused him. But now, watching her broken and defeated, he felt nothing. Perhaps that was the true price of vengeance, not the act itself, but the emptiness it left behind. The phone buzzed once more, the final message appearing on the screen: "She will suffer for as long as you desire. You know how to reach me, if you ever change your mind." Richard set the phone down with trembling hands, his gaze drifting to the faint outline of the wedding photo still hanging on the wall. The man in the picture, smiling, happy, full of hope, felt like a stranger to him now. What had he become? A monster, no better than the creature he'd unleashed. He let out a shuddering sigh, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his actions settled over him like a heavy shroud. There was no going back. No undoing what he had set in motion. The woman he had loved was gone, replaced by something twisted and broken. And he was the one who had destroyed her. Richard rose from the chair, his movements slow and deliberate. He crossed the room and reached up, gently taking down the photo from the wall. For a long moment, he stared at it, at the smiling faces that no longer meant anything to him. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he turned the frame over and set it face down on the table. There would be no looking back. No regrets. No second chances. Teresa was gone. And so was the man who had once loved her. Far away, in the shadowed depths of a realm beyond human comprehension, Teresa hung suspended in darkness. Pain lanced through her body, every nerve alight with agony. She tried to move, to scream, but the shadows held her fast, twisting and constricting with every breath she took. "Please," she whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, let me go." The darkness around her rippled, a low, mocking laughter resonating through the void. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and indistinct, its eyes burning with a cruel, malevolent light. "Let you go," the creature murmured, its voice a silken purr. "Oh, my dear, you're not going anywhere. This is your new home, forever." Teresa's heart pounded in her chest, her mind screaming in denial. "No, no, please. Richard, help me." The creature's laughter echoed around her, a sound filled with dark, twisted delight. "He can't hear you, Teresa. He's the one who put you here. You're his gift, to me." Tears streamed down her face, the realization crashing over her like a wave of ice-cold water. Richard, he had done this. He had betrayed her, just as she had betrayed him. And now, she was trapped. Bound to this place, to this creature's will. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The creature tilted its head, as if considering her words. Then, slowly, it leaned closer, its breath hot against her ear. "Oh, I know you're sorry, Teresa," it whispered, its voice a low, insidious murmur. "But that's not enough. You're going to pay for every lie, every deceit, and when I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never been born." Teresa sobbed, her body trembling as the shadows tightened around her, the pain escalating to a blinding, unbearable intensity. "Welcome to your eternity, my dear," the creature purred. "And remember, this is all thanks to Richard. You can thank him, for every moment of your torment." The darkness closed in, swallowing her screams. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this tale. I hope you enjoyed the story and felt immersed in this world of fantasy and adventure. If you'd like to hear more epic stories like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next chapter in our journey. See you in the next adventure.